All right, time to talk some politicking now. Welcome back. That's John King. Good morning, John.
Hey, good morning, Peter.
And Dr. Patrick Peel joining us this morning from the University of Montana Poli-Sci Department. Is that okay to say? Is that acceptable?
It's perfect. Thank you.
All right. Now, before we get into the whole thing with the Supreme Court deal, I wanted to get your take on the decision yesterday from Judge Charles Lovell striking down the campaign contribution limits in Montana as being unconstitutional. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't. I just got up in the morning and I made my way here, and so I haven't even read the papers.
Okay,
now I have to rush out and do that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that because if you remember, you probably weren't here 4 years ago when a similar thing happened, and someone gave the Republican candidate for governor,
right?
Since the campaign limits were demolished, gave him $500,000,
right,
in Montana, for the gubernatorial campaign, and that caused a big mess.
Huge.
Wasn't the party that gave it to him?
Yeah, it was a party.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway.
Right. I've got my homework now. Now I need to, right.
There you go. Okay, so we know the reason why you are here is to talk about the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
Okay. A little bit closer to the microphone.
Sure.
If you would, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and also, I don't think we've had you on Talkback before. Maybe give us a little bit of background. Tell us about yourself.
Right.
Well, I'm from Seattle originally, and my dad's side of the family is from Montana, and so a job opened up at the university, and I thought I would try to move back here and spend some time, and it's close to Seattle and my family, so I thought it'd be great. And I've been just finished teaching an Introduction to American Politics class at 8 in the morning with about 170 undergraduate. That's right.
Sleepy students?
Right.
Did you say undergraduates?
Undergrads, that's right. And then taught a seminar on
They all
civil
have the
rights.
Starbucks IV going?
That's right, a lot of coffee. So we just finished.
They're probably a little pessimistic. America's going to go through the apocalypse before the end of the year. I'm not worried too much about what happened before. So tell us a little bit about why you got into political science. I mean, why is this your life's work?
Well, I think it's like anything we find that we stumble into. We meet people that inspire us. We find that we love teaching and working with undergraduate students, and then we find our way into a topic we love. And so, I decided after I was in undergrad, I took some time off, and then I decided to go to graduate school and study the court and judicial politics and political philosophy. And so I taught at Puget Sound for a little while in the University of Ohio, and then now here. So
that's your game, is the judicial side of things, really.
Yeah.
Which is probably ripe season for you, watching what's going on with the Supreme Court now.
Exactly.
Just give us a little bit of history for those that don't know the name Merrick Garland and what all that means. Tell us a little bit about what's happened in the last 9 months.
Not only that, but the death of Antonin Scalia was such a shock, right?
Right, it really was. So Merrick Garland was a judge on the appeals court in Washington, D.C., which is the second most powerful and influential court in the United States, and he was nominated by President Obama to take Anthony Scalia's position on the Supreme Court, who was one of the most influential justices of the modern period. And maybe we'll get into some of why there's so much contention on this, but part of it is that Garland is a much more liberal justice compared to Scalia. And so for conservatives, this is a sort of rallying
Well, it's red meat, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And this is a political season.
Yeah.
And we have a presidential election, we have a Senate election, and we have congressional elections. So there's a lot going on.
So in the political side of things, right, we've got the Republicans who run the Senate and the House right now, and a Democratic president. The Democratic president, Barack Obama, has put forward Merrick.
Right.
But the House and the Senate basically are holding off any kind of push until after the election. That's their claim.
Right.
And it seems to me there's been a lot of hypocrisy on both sides, where the Democrats said, we would never do this, it's never been done before, and the Republicans saying, that this is a tried and true ancient tradition, and may have said things in the past that were contrary to what they've said now. What's your take on all this? What is the real history? Who's right on the way that this has been done in the past?
Right. So there's an argument out there that it's a constitutional obligation for the Senate to hold hearings now that the president has put forth a nominee. I think
that's the president's position, right?
Right. I think the general kind of scholarly line on this is that although there's a lot of debate back and forth politically, there isn't a constitutional obligation. Alexander Hamilton, when they were framing the Constitution, argued that there was a constitutional obligation, but there were others that argued there was not.
And he got shot
And he got shot. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
And they worked out a compromise
He had a
position.
burr under his saddle, I guess, didn't he?
Oh.
I'm sorry. But
Still
seriously.
stings.
They worked out a compromise position. The compromise position was that the Senate was going to have the authority with regards to advice and consent, and the president would get to nominate. So they would involve both branches of government.
Well, so the president's position is like, yeah, you get to advise, you get to consent, but you have to at least have the hearing. You have to at least listen to go through the question and answer period. And they're not doing that.
Right.
Does he have a case there by saying that they need to have that question and answer period?
Right. My kind of official line on this as a political scientist is that it's all about politics. This is not about the law or the meaning of the Constitution, but it's really a series of strategic moves by the president in this election cycle and the Republicans to try to win with both their bases.
All right. Well, we got to go to a break. When we get back, I have a clip of Mitch McConnell from, I think it was from March, where he said this. And he kind of talks about their strategy going into the Merrick Garland decision, and he cites some Democrats from the past of basically contrary to their position now on this issue.
We're going to come right back. And by the way, all of our four of our phone lines are open. If you want to get in on the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Dr. Patrick Peel joining us from the Political Science Department at the University of Montana, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Talk Back. 721-1290 is our number. John King is over there. I'm Peter Christian. Joining us in the studio, Dr. Patrick Peel from the University of Montana Political Science Department.
And Mitch McConnell's also joining us right now. Thanks for coming in, Mitch.
Okay. Let me get this ready for you. I was frantically looking for music.
This is actually a segment from, I think, Fox Sunday Morning News.
Right. So here is Mitch McConnell on Merrick Garland.
I mean, we're following the Biden rule. When Biden was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in 1992, a presidential election year, he said the Senate should not act on filling a Supreme Court vacancy if it had occurred that year. Harry Reid, when he was back in 2005, said the president nominates, but the Senate doesn't have to vote. Chuck Schumer, who will be the next Democratic leader, said in 2007 they wouldn't confirm, the Democrats were in the majority in the Senate, they wouldn't confirm a Bush appointment to the Supreme Court if one occurred within 18 months of a presidential election. So all we're doing, Chris, is following a long-standing tradition of not filling vacancies on the Supreme Court in the middle of a presidential election year.
I am going to ask Mr. McDonough about the Biden rule in a moment, but frankly, isn't there a fair amount of hypocrisy on both sides here? Right now, President Obama is calling for an up or down vote on his nominee. You oppose that, but back in 2005, when George W. Bush was president, you made exactly the same argument that Barack Obama is making now. Take a look, sir.
In a democracy, an up or down vote should be given to a president's judicial nominees. It's not complicated. It's simple. It's fair. It worked for 229 years, and it has served us well.
Senator, if an up or down vote for a judicial nominee is simple, fair, and a principle that has served us for 229 years, I guess now it's over 230 years, if that's true then, is it still true?
Yeah, what we're talking about apples and oranges. That comment was not in connection with the Supreme Court vacancy. What we're talking about here's the factual situation.
But it's still a judicial nominee,
the Supreme Court, not the same. The Supreme Court is very different from the other courts. What we're talking about here is a Supreme Court vacancy in the middle of a presidential election year made by a lame duck president who is on the way out the door, and the impact that will have on this court for the next quarter of a century. That is the issue before us right now.
All right.
So there you go. So who's right? Are they both right or are they both wrong?
They're both right.
Oh, sorry.
Both
Go ahead.
wrong,
Yeah.
I think is the answer. I mean, I think one of the things when you hear this that you have to think about are the audiences that the politicians are speaking to. And I think this argument is an argument on the Republican side that's pitched to their base, not to independent voters. And they think they can mobilize their base by supporting the Constitution from their point of view, right?
Well, let me ask you this, because if it really is just a political thing, this is the political season. It's a presidential election year. A couple months left to go, really. And Democrats are down a Senate, down a House. They really want these back. So when it comes to those independent voters, which you really need to win those seats, which side of this debate do you think is going to make out the best with those voters? Or will this even be a concern for most voters?
I have to say, I think it's the latter. I mean, they do polling. Gallup poll has been doing polling on this question: to what extent an election cycle does who the next, who will control the Supreme Court register on voters' horizons, and it ranks, 0.5%. I mean, people focus on the economy. I mean, as you know, this was an issue when it first happened, and that's kind of faded. We've had Trump on the horizon. Nevertheless, if you're a committed Republican, or if you're a committed Democrat, or if you're an interest group on the Democratic side or an interest group on the Republican side, this issue can get you motivated to get out to vote, right? But for the average voter, people want to focus on other things, I think.
Let me ask you this. As a guy that studied political science, the U.S. Constitution, American politics, don't you think that the American public is silly on this? I mean, the president was not designed to be businessman in chief or business lady in chief, right? But he is given this responsibility to nominate Supreme Court justices. Right? It's scripted in the job title. You'd think, let's make sure the person for the job knows what they're doing when it comes to, the parts that we know he's got to do or she's got to do.
Right. So your question is that...
My question is, don't you think that the American public, I don't know, maybe just ignorance about the job description of the U.S. president when they put something like Supreme Court nominations on such a low priority?
Right. Well, one of the things that's happened to our politics is, with Congress being kind of, dysfunctional, we've pushed more and more of our politics into the federal courts and the Supreme Court. And that's a type of elite politics. And the average voter doesn't pay attention to some of these debates as much as they perhaps should. But activists pay attention to these things.
Well, the do-nothing Congress is nothing new, right? I mean, it all depends on who's president and how popular or unpopular they might be.
Right.
The strategy is, well, we'll just stall until we got our guy in there, and then we'll get stuff done.
Right.
But according to, like I mentioned, Rob Nadelson, they did a study not long ago. They said the most productive sessions of Congress are with a divided. Division of power.
Most productive?
Yeah, the most productive.
In what way?
Well, because more things get done when there's a Republican president and a Democratic Congress, as opposed to when everything's all one part. Anyway, that's what Rob said.
Well, Rob said it was more beneficial, not productive.
Oh, I'm sorry. Beneficial.
I think you're
better word.
We're talking about the number of the number of the pieces of legislation by design of the founders is going to go down in a divided legislature,
right?
And where the parts of government are. But of
so
course, Rob is a small government guy, likes them not producing a lot of stuff.
So the less intrusion on the American people, the better.
That's his position.
In a divided, yeah. So that's my view.
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
Anyway.
And of course, the Democrats want to have a hearing because they want to show, from their point of view, to the average voter that the Republicans are out of the mainstream. So they're going to put as much pressure as they possibly can to get a hearing. And, of course, the Republicans are going to try to hold a principled line from their point of view. And we'll see how it cashes out.
Well, I've been reading that the Democrats are considering a bunch of shenanigans to try to force him in through an executive session. What do you think about that, and what would that do?
Where they would call Congress back from the Senate back from a recess. Is that right? The president could call the Senate back from a recess, but if the Republicans controlled the Senate, they could just hold off. There was a case recently, the Noel Cannon case, perhaps we'll get to it, that increased the Senate's power to control their own rules with regards to recesses, so it makes it even more difficult for the president.
All right, we're going to come right back. 721-1290. I'd love to have you get in on this conversation. 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. We also have our Facebook page. If you can't get through, if you're busy or whatever, you can get your message through on Facebook. We'll be happy to share it with Dr. Patrick Peel from the University of Montana Political Science Department. Coming right back. This is Talk Back, and we're talking politics with a political science professor, Dr. Patrick Peel from the University of Montana. And John King's over there. I'm Peter Christian. Jerry's on the line. Good morning, Jerry. You're on with Dr. Peel. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I was curious if Obama could do like what Bush did and have a recess appointment for the UN ambassador, but this time would be a Supreme Court judge.
Is that something that's possible?
It's possible that he could issue a recess appointment, but it would only last until the next Senate. So there's different kinds of possibilities strategically, but essentially, if he was able to do that, Merrick Garland would have his job for I guess till 2019.
Yeah,
So,
a couple months.
Well, it'd be longer than a couple months. I mean, if he did it in the recess in between the elections, I think Congress comes back on January 3rd, and the new president would take office on January 30th at noon. So there's this window,
A couple months and 15 hours.
right? There's this window where you could have a lot of
Quick, how many cases we get in there during that window? Real quick.
right for the recess appointment, right?
Yeah. So does that help you?
Thank you.
Thanks for the call. All right, 721-1290. Whoa, my goodness. 721-1290 is the number.
So it sounds to me like there's a lot of chess going on,
Yeah.
right? Because
Right.
the Democrats might do a recess appointment. I mean, Obama might do that if he thought it was the best solution they had available.
Right.
And the Republicans might even put Merrick Garland in if they think that perhaps a worse nominee would come if they lose the election.
Right.
Or if the Senate were to flip. So with all these, second and third moves,
I feel like we're playing
ahead,
three-dimensional chess
Yeah.
here with on the Enterprise with Spock.
Exactly.
I want to put it to you. What do you think is the most likely scenario? What do you think will happen?
I think the most likely scenario is that Garland becomes a Supreme Court nominee over time. I mean, the Republicans have this kind of optionality. I mean, let's say they lost the Senate. They have this window of opportunity where they could have a hearing and have a vote on Garland very quickly. So for them, there's no downside
To waiting.
I mean, they've said they don't want to do this, but if you read closely the tea leaves, a couple senators say, "Well, we could."
There's two
Right.
Republican senators, right?
So,
And both of them from one's from Maine, I think, right?
right.
Republican bastion.
Right. Really a very strong Republican stronghold.
So I guess
Right.
if you think that they're going to put Garland in, and the hesitation is basically just political gamesmanship.
Right.
That is setting aside one thing that you said earlier, because you said that he was less conservative than Antonin Scalia.
Right.
In what ways do you feel that Garland doesn't meet the Scalia chops when it comes to principles of interpretation?
Right. Well, he's a Democratic, nominee. Political scientists do these complicated scores where they score justices on ideological scales, and if you look at those, Garland is just a little bit more liberal than Kagan, a little bit more liberal than Breyer. Scalia is on the far other side, and the history of Supreme Court nominations, when you're replacing justices that are of the same ideological stripe, there's not as much contention because it's not going to change much. But when you're replacing a Scalia with a Garland, it's a huge shift.
I have difficulty in knowing what people are talking about when they say a Supreme Court justice is conservative or liberal.
Right.
I think that's difficult for me to understand as someone that looks at this fairly regularly.
Like take John Roberts, for instance.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Second Amendment, for example,
Yeah, so-
and that's been something that they've hit Garland on. The NRA has gone back and tried to argue that he might be soft on the Second Amendment. That was one of Scalia's famous decisions in the Heller decision to say the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to a firearm. So, it's certain, as someone pro-life, pro-choice, these sorts of kind of ideological issues.
Now, when President Obama promised when he was running first, back in 2008, and he said, "I want to fundamentally change this country." That was one of the themes in his campaign. Now that he's been president for 7 years, a lot of people are saying, well, it seems the fundamental changes he wants to do, one of them that he's really working towards is to either, soften the Second Amendment or do something, whether it's for the Supreme Court justice nominee or whatever, to, if you will, erode the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. Now, is that something that could happen if Mr. Garland becomes a Supreme Court justice?
Right. So there's judicial precedents, and the court can change its opinions on certain things, but the court on the whole tends to follow its precedents. I think one of the things that's particularly interesting is right now, we have this guy named Donald Trump, and Trump is changing the nature of the Republican Party. When Trump and Ryan had their big meeting just the other day, Ryan came out to talk about where there were points of unity, and if you look at the language that he used, he talked about the Constitution. The thing that's holding the Republican Party together now is a certain vision of the Constitution, a vision that Scalia and Thomas embody. To attack that is to go to the lifeblood of the Republican Party today. And so that's why for Republicans it's such a partisan issue. The Second Amendment, religious liberty issues.
How about Citizens United? I know in all the press releases I've read from every Democratic gubernatorial candidate, senatorial candidate, whatever it is, the one thing they want to do is overturn the Citizens United because Citizens United basically says that corporations are people and they have the right to spend money on political issues, right?
Well, that was before Citizens United, but
Right.
But anyway.
Right. I mean, I think there is a lot of movement on the Citizens United front, and that's one of the issues that could change. Law and order issues, the death penalty, for example, Justice Breyer signaled just even recently, a couple days ago, in a decision the court decided not to take, saying that he thought that the death penalty was unconstitutional. He had said that in an earlier case. And so these are kinds of big cultural issues.
how do these judges say this sort of stuff? I don't understand. Okay, we have had Supreme Court justices. We have the books. We have the papers. We have had America for the entire written history of humanity.
Right.
There was death penalty in every state going back to the founding.
Right. Right.
I mean,
How does this happen?
how does it? See, I can understand the Republican vision of an originalist interpretation of the
Right.
Constitution. I have no clue what liberals want when it comes to interpreting the Constitution.
Right. Well, there are debates about what, you have these broad phrases, the Equal Protection Clause, the Due Process Clause, and its protection of liberty. These clauses, a lot can be read into these clauses. And so who is reading them? What the judge is, what their judicial philosophy is. Is it Merrick Garland? Is it a Scalia? Matters a great deal on these fundamental issues. And as I say, we've pushed so much of our politics into these issues.
We're going to come right back. We have all four lines open, 721-1290. We have a Facebook comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll read. Elena has a question for you.
Okay, we're going to come right back, and we'd love to hear from you for another 28 minutes or so. We'll be right back. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. John King over there. I'm Peter Christian. Dr. Patrick Peel joining us from the Political Science Department, University of Montana. Now, you have a Facebook post.
Yeah, I have a question from Elena. And Elena wants to know, does anyone know what's up with the Kentucky primary that they still haven't declared the official winner? I heard there were a few glitches, one being that the Secretary of State is longtime friends and a contributor of the Clintons. You know what's going on there?
I don't know the inside story with the Clintons.
Now, let me ask you this. Would that Secretary of State be a superdelegate?
Probably not.
Okay.
Possible. I mean, usually the superdelegates, well, some of them are just like media people, but usually they're former senators or presidents, things like that.
Okay.
Like, think, for example, in Montana, one of them's Governor Bullock, one of them's John Tester. Do you know, I think we have three from Montana. Do you know what the third is?
I don't know who it is.
But they're not allowed to say who they're voting for, Hillary, until after June 7th.
Hint. Anyway.
So,
In other words, we have no idea what's going on in Kentucky.
I don't.
Not yet. Okay. All right.
well, I can tell you that the final, the ballots, as far as the, right now it's 27 delegates for Clinton, 27 delegates for Sanders, with 46% or for both of the candidates. There's a split of just a few. It's 212,549 people voting for Clinton, 210,626 going for Sanders.
Wow.
It doesn't tell us if those are all living people or not.
Right.
I couldn't get into the metric that closely.
And in Kentucky, we don't know how many horses are voting, because it's, the thoroughbreds and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. If Fancy Dan is voting, then it's probably not a legitimate type of deal. Not that anybody would ever do that, of course. No. But anyway. So we are coming up on our primary here pretty quick.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, did you go to the Bernie Sanders rally?
I didn't. We were just talking about that at break. I'm afraid to say I wasn't even aware that it was happening until after it happened. But people told me it was a huge...
It happened really quick. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, he's flying to Montana. He's here for 2 visits, which I don't know what your take on it was, but my take on it was, wow, this is really desperate. Why would you ever come to Montana?
It was...
Unless you're just here to... I understand you're getting a lot of crowds. You're getting a lot of people to support you. You're getting rally behind you. But the numbers in the game that really count, getting the delegates, getting the votes, they're not here right? You're on the wrong side of the football field. You're in the concession stand if you're in Montana.
Well, didn't he go to Puerto Rico?
What? To my point exactly.
Yeah, right.
This is someone that's there to rally and change the party and the messaging of the party. He wants to make it a Democratic Socialist Party instead of the Democratic Party that it's been before.
Or maintain his influence in the Democratic Party. Right?
I want, as a political scientist, how would you define Bernie Sanders' message when he says the government needs to provide health care for everybody, Medicare for everybody. The government needs to forgive all the student debt. The government needs to fund colleges so that every student can go to school and not have a big fat bill at the end. Right. So what is that? I mean, it sounds like, really like a great idea, but is that socialism or not?
Right. So I think the tradition he's speaking out of is a tradition that really picked up speed during the New Deal and then the Great Society. And then, as you know, the Democratic Party in 1968 kind of imploded at the famous Democratic Convention. And again, with the Republicans, we don't see this where parties try to remake themselves. I mean, maybe 68 was the last time we saw this, and the Republicans are dealing with something similar now. But Sanders is speaking out of that kind of old-time religion of the Democratic Party that the Clintons did not represent. The Clintons represented an opportunity to try to take issues away from the Republicans and move the Democratic Party more to the center.
Well, when I visited with Senator Steve Daines, the afternoon after Senator Sanders was here in town, his words to me was, when Bernie Sanders speaks, grab your wallets, because he is, in his words, Senator Santa Claus. Okay, so he wants to give everything to everybody, even though we're already $19 trillion in debt. Doesn't matter. We want to do all these things. So, what's your view on that?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that fits in with the kind of Great Society idea that you would have large government programs, and through taxation and redistribution, you would pay attention to fundamental issues of economic inequality. I think what's interesting in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is you see a sense, and among young people, that people feel like things are stuck. Right. Things are broken and people are angry. And that's what you see. And it's interesting, you see it on both sides of the party. There are labor constituencies, unions that are thinking about, putting pressure on the Democratic Party and saying, look, maybe we'll vote with Trump. So we're getting a giant shakeup in our politics. And a lot of people have talked about this for a long time. And, we'll see how it cashes out.
Well, I'm curious what you think that trend is, because I've noticed this about Trump. He seems to be trying to pull a large segment of the Democratic Party that you would have called like the blue-collar working class of the Democratic Party. Do you think he'll be successful in pulling them?
That's an interesting question. As I say, there was just a newspaper article talking about, union members in the construction trades just the other day, saying that they're unhappy about some of the funding that's going on with regards to environmental issues for the Democratic Party. So I think we are seeing that. Whether he'll be successful, we'll see. I mean, it's a big change for the Republican Party. So we'll have to see. Yeah, we're
going to come right back, and we have two calls, Marilyn and Catherine, both waiting to visit. We'll get them on in just a moment. We have two lines open. The number is 721-1290. We could rock out with the best of it. 721-1290 is the number. John King over there. I'm Peter Christian. Patrick Peel joining us here in studio from the University of Montana Political Science Department. You have a Facebook post.
Yeah, on Facebook, Sue says, I learned some interesting information last night from a Washington insider. She has that in quotations.
Okay.
She said that the whole process of the Supreme Court selection is a big game the Republicans and Democrats are playing, almost like a chess game. Wow. But she could have just listened to us. We've said all these things so far. That probably won't be settled until after the election, and it all depends on who wins. And remember, President Obama is president until January 20th. So, kind of restated our show there for us.
Absolutely true, yes.
So there you go. Let's move on. Marilyn's been waiting the longest. Hi, Marilyn. You're on with Dr. Peel. Hi. Marilyn?
You got to turn up her mic. It's not clicked in.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, Marilyn. Go ahead, please. What's on your mind?
Okay, socialism, other countries around the world are fleeing socialism, but America seems to be running headlong into it, and it's so disgusting to me.
We're certainly flirting with it, aren't we?
Yeah, so I heard some information about Bernie Sanders' wife. I'd been wondering about her, and I hadn't heard anything until the other day. I heard that she evidently was, I don't know if she was president of the Burlington College or what she was doing there. But anyway, she ran up so much debt that the college is now closing down. So there you go, socialists. That's what happens when Democrats and socialists and rhinos are in charge.
All right, thanks, Marilyn.
Yep.
Thanks for calling, Marilyn.
So there you go. All right, so let's get Catherine on the line. Catherine, you're up. Hi.
Hi, good morning. Okay, in 1917, Vladimir Lenin once said, in order to control your opposition, you need to become the leader of it. And what, of course, that means is that every group needs an opposing force to fight against in order to justify its existence, okay? So using that quote as kind of a lens through which to observe current events, I'd like to ask you if you think that this is basically the culmination of a fight between collectivism versus individualism, or to put it another way, globalism versus nationalism. And who do you think is going to win?
Wow, he's shaking his head. Okay.
It's a big,
Thank you,
right?
Catherine.
This is a big kind of political philosophy sort of issue. What I would say is that if you look at the American political tradition, like full spectrum, you see various voices in the system. And that's probably we've never had a single American philosopher who's defined for us what it is to be an American. What we have is we have a great debate.
We have a great French philosopher that defined it for
de
us.
Tocqueville, yeah.
De Tocqueville, right. But what we've had in this country is a great debate about the meaning of democracy, freedom, and I would suggest that the energy of this country comes from the fact that we as a society can have these debates. You cannot do that in a lot of other countries. We take it for granted.
And it all boils right down to that little few pieces of paper we like to call the Constitution.
Right, and the Declaration of Independence. Right.
All those great things.
Right. And that's again why this issue with Merrick Garland is so contentious potentially, is because the Constitution is our focal point for debating and defining who we are as a country. And as I say, it's there are lots of fistfights and arguments, but it's something that's deeply valued, that conversation.
Do you think that's going the way of the dodo bird, though? As the states become more unified under a federally run establishment, whether that be through the courts, whether that be through various bureaucracies that are set aside to run things by the U.S. legislature,
Right.
It seems like we're more and more becoming the same. Laws in one state are the same as laws in another state. The disagreements that the states might have had between each other are going to the past. Do you think that will create a national identity of America where there will be less argumentation?
Right. I sure hope not. The Constitution has that great preamble that says, "We the people." And the question of how we control our agents and how we define who we are is central to the American project. And that's one of the arguments for localism and federalism, is you want to have you let 1,000 flowers bloom and see how things work themselves out. So I hope we continue that tradition in the country.
One of the things that Rob Nadelson is fond of saying is that the states are the, what do they call it, the where they can experiment.
Laboratories.
Yeah, the laboratories to find out if certain policies and procedures will work. And if they do, they might be nationalized. But if they don't, well, then we just avoided a big trap nationally.
Right. And another argument, for federalism and localism is that if you don't like it here, it's hard to get up and leave, but the ability to exit is tremendously powerful too, right? You can vote the bums out, but you can also leave. And if everything's the same, there's nowhere else to go, right? So.
Okay, we're going to come back. We have a 1-minute timeout. Willis, I promise in 60 seconds we'll have your call on. And we have 3 lines open. We also have our Facebook page and about 8 minutes left in the program. So give us a call. Oh, yeah. 721-1290 is the number. Rockin' Politics, I guess this morning is the best way to put this. Dr. Patrick Peel joining us here in studio, and on the phone we have Willis. Willis, first of all, thank you for holding, sir. What's on your mind?
Yes, I've done missions work for over 20 years and traveled on over 20 trips into Eastern Europe in particular. And I have talked to dozens and dozens of people in the Eastern Soviet bloc, former bloc. And the socialism that took place there if every American could travel, it would be worth our government to pay for a month's trip for every American to go to Eastern Europe and see the devastation that socialism has left behind. My son, when he was about 5 years old, we were on a trip, and he got sick, deathly sick. And we took him to a local doctor. They had the Obama-style care that is being implemented here. And he ended up with nose drops and vitamin C. And everybody there is equal, but they are equally poverty-stricken. It takes and creates such a criminal aspect because nobody has enough. So there forms a black market. You cannot do anything without paying a bribe. So that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Wallace. Appreciate the call. So how do you respond to that, Patrick?
It's an interesting job, isn't it? I was thinking when you were talking, I was reading an article in The Economist the other day about the rule of Mao and afterwards of Xiaoping and stuff like that. And they said, in the article, the author says, it's the nature of capitalist societies to make the rich powerful, and the nature of communist societies to make the powerful rich. And I thought that was an interesting kind of truth to that, because you do see these families in countries where the bureaucracies become instituted. They just pay out their friends and their families, and if you're still alive by the time they're dead, you might inherit something.
Right.
But I don't know. Back to the United States and our jurisprudence.
Right.
What do you think this election will mean going forward? Both of the parties have been kind of brutalized from inside through these primary processes in a way that I have not seen in the past.
A lot of upheaval going on.
Watching what happened in Nevada, watching what happened. Well, I guess it has happened for the Democrats in the past. We've had riots at delegate meetings and things like that in the past. But do you think this is going to be something that really changes both of the parties going forward?
I think the consensus is that what's going to happen with the Democratic Party is that it's going to get pulled to the left, in part because of people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. As we were talking during break, Hillary Clinton, of course, represents a sort of Clinton argument about the nature of the Democratic Party, which was more centrist. So we'll have to see how she modulates that. And in part, it was meant to be more centrist to take issues away from Republicans to win elections.
Do you think that they will do away with their superdelegate system they've had since the 80s?
I wouldn't think so. I'd be very surprised.
All right, now let me ask you this real quickly. When it comes to running mates, we still don't know yet. There are rumors that Hillary will pick her husband. I mean, yeah. Anyway,
Right.
All right. Donald Trump, he has a raft of people to pick from.
Right.
Any idea, just off the top of your head, as a political scientist?
I don't know. I mean, I've been focusing on the Republican race a little bit more because it's so amazingly interesting, and I know that Trump has been having
AKA weird. But anyway,
he's been having conversations with Newt Gingrich. I don't, so I have no inside sort of information on this sort of thing. But it will be very interesting to see who these people choose.
let's put it this way. When you pick a vice presidential running mate, you try to find someone with skills that are different than yours to complement your campaign, right?
Right, to win the election, yeah.
To win the election. So
Because they don't do anything after that.
Donald Trump seems to be a man who thinks he's complete in himself. So, I mean, that's the persona.
Doesn't need a vice president. No.
Well, yeah. I mean,
introduce you to Mirror Man.
Hello, it's me and me.
Right.
So, any idea who might complement him?
I don't know. I would think that someone though who helps solidify his relationship with the Republican Party would be a great asset.
And with women.
And with women. I mean, that's a real problem, right?
Brad Pitt.
Right.
Yeah, let's see.
Carly Fiorina, she's gone. She's gone.
Yeah. So yeah. So anyway, we had a caller a second ago, but
yeah. Well, it was someone seconding the idea that things in socialist countries are pretty down the
pretty
shoots.
Abysmal, right?
I have a question for you when it comes to the process in the United States when we do our primaries. I think it's kind of absurd the way that the states are laid out. The Democrats are all upset about the way their primaries are. I mean, I haven't talked to a person other than listening to Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and a few others defend the superdelegate process. I haven't talked to a person that likes that process. Why are you so sure that it'll exist?
Well, I think they were. I mean, the system was designed so that people who run the Democratic Party can have kind of consensus candidates, and someone can't come out of left field who upsets the party.
Well, they want control.
I think so, and this is something that the parties have been keen on maintaining, and so I think from their point of view, to change that. But maybe Bernie Sanders supporters will get out there and organize around the issue and change it, right? I mean, that's possible, I guess.
But isn't it ironically? It's ironically less democratic.
Right.
System, right?
Right.
This is not some ancient thing that they've embedded in the Constitution. They pulled this out in the 80s after they lost horribly with Carter.
Right.
To a Republican primary system that was doing the exact same thing, and they blamed it on not having these superdelegates.
Right.
Okay, let's try to get one more call in. Tony, real quickly, you got about a minute. What's on your mind?
Oh, Peter, just something you said about the laboratories and trying different forms of
Yes, sir.
government, seeing how things work. Reminded me of William Bradford and how he tried that in the Plymouth plantation. He tried that socialist, communist style of running things.
Right.
And he quickly learned that people realized that they could get food and shelter and clothing and not have to work for it, that they wouldn't, and that it didn't work. So that was, I think, in our history, one of the most famous examples of a laboratory, if you will. And unfortunately, if you don't learn from your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think that people need to go back and remember our roots and how we learned that once the hard way and realize that it doesn't work.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate the call. We have less than a minute. So, Dr. Peel, real quickly, 30-second summation of what we talked about today. Where are we headed in this country now?
Well,
in your view?
Well, I think we're going to get Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens. I think we're at one of those central turning points in American politics where parties try to reinvent themselves. I think a lot of the population feels that things are stuck and broken. Whether we'll see the kind of large-scale change that a lot of people have talked about, we'll have to wait and see until after the election.
You assume Merrick Garland's getting in. I think that means you probably think Hillary will win this election.
Well, we'll see. I mean,
because if she doesn't, I don't see a chance for Merrick.
We have 10
I think
seconds.
you might be right about that.
All right. Hey, Mark Thane coming up tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
Superintendent of School District 1. You guys have a great day. And don't forget the opening ceremonies for the Special Olympics tonight at Washington Grizzly.